Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Juicebox Podcast. Ready to have some fun? Jenny's back for another episode of I Don't Understand. Did you like the last one? I hope you did, because there's going to be more of Jenny and me and other people not understanding things and us figuring it out. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Eversense CGM. An implantable 6-month sensor is what you get with Eversense, but you get so much more. Exceptional and consistent accuracy over 6 months, and distinct on-body vibe alerts when you're high or low. On-body vibe alerts? You don't even know what that means, do you? EversenseCGM.com/Juicebox. Go find out. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by US Med. usmed.com/Juicebox or call 888-721-1514. US Med is where my daughter gets her diabetes supplies from, and you could too. Use the link or number to get your free benefit check and get started today with US Med. Today's episode is sponsored by Medtronic Diabetes, a company that's bringing together people who are redefining what it means to live with diabetes. Later in this episode, I'll be speaking with Mark. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 28. He's 47 now. He's going to tell you a little bit about his story. And then at the very end of the episode, you can hear my entire mini interview with Mark. To hear more stories from the Medtronic Champion community or to share your own story, visit medtronicdiabetes.com/Juicebox and check out the Medtronic Champion hashtag on social media. We're going to do something here today. We're going to try to figure this out together because I don't understand this and I don't know if you do either.
Okay.
Now, this is actually coming from a listener, so I'm going to read their question. But
okay.
Truth be told, I don't understand this the way I should. I don't think you do either. And let's see if we can figure it out together. Did you hear episode 1230 with the gentleman who had type 1 diabetes diagnosed at age 50 and now at age 58 on Mounjaro is not taking any insulin at all?
I did. I did listen to that episode.
Well, that's perfect because this gentleman says, with regard to podcast number 1230, where the T1D guest says he has been completely off of insulin for 2 years due to being on a GLP-1 medication, how does his body get nutrients without insulin? Does insulin only shepherd glucose to muscles and cells? So now this person right here, their confusion is where my I don't understand comes in, because what they think is, well, that guy's not making insulin anymore because that's what I was told about type 1. Type 1 means don't make insulin, which we all agree about. But then if this guy was type 1, how is he not taking man-made insulin? And if he's not, how come all this stuff isn't happening to him? So my question is, Jenny, I don't understand how this happened to that guest on that episode. Do you understand why he doesn't need insulin anymore?
Not in an in-depth way, but I think, one, his diagnosis was at age 50, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So he was diagnosed as an adult, so LADA. What we do know about diagnosis as adults, and it differs adult to adult, is that they have a tendency to actually have more beta cell reserve. And the expectation is that, and if I remember correctly, he still wears a CGM, even though he just uses the GLP-1 right now, right? So he did say that he can see excursions in his blood sugar, but his body fixes those excursions.
Yes.
Like his blood sugar might go up to 170, 180. It does it on its own and brings it back down to the goal target. For the most part, again, generalizing, people without type 1 that have fully functioning beta cells, their blood sugar is not going to go up to 180.
Right.
It is not. It takes a lot of excessive, really simple carb to get it to nudge above target.
Yes.
Right? So he's having excursions. He doesn't technically have to take insulin, but I also expect that most of the time he's not eating, 6 plates of sushi. He's probably eating a really well-balanced diet, He exercises, if I remember correctly from the episode. And so his beta cells that were in reserve, along with the impact of the Mounjaro, which is the only dual hormone, right? It's a GLP-1 and it's a GIP.
Yes.
So it's the one on the market that has the heaviest impact on insulin sensitivity and weight loss and glucose management. So when we consider the kind of GLP-1 he's on, the fact that he was diagnosed as an adult likely has a beta cell reserve. That would be my, again, tip of the iceberg understanding as to why he's not having to inject or pump insulin at this point.
Yeah. Okay. So that is exactly my expectation. That in truth, the poor guy might very well need his insulin again at some point.
At some point. Yeah.
Right. But it is not. So the story gets confusing, like it's confusing to this person because, I'm confused as to why this guy isn't starving because he's not taking insulin. He's on a GLP medication that suppresses appetite. Everything about it is confusing. It's exciting to see someone needing only one dose a week of GLP and that he's off insulin. I just want to understand how this works. So this guy's being very reasonable. I've seen people not be reasonable around this conversation, right?
I have seen that as well. And I also think in terms of the gentleman's question, the idea that type 1 totally and completely destroys every single little teeny tiny beta cell that you have in your body, that's not really the case, right? I mean, the only true measure of that would be a C-peptide. And I don't know that he commented on his C-peptides. I don't remember in the conversation if he did or not, but I would expect that with this downshift in delay in digestion, the body's ability to not have these major excursions in blood sugar, I would expect that, again, those betas that are in reserve for him, he probably has still diagnostic of type 1, but he probably has more C-peptide visible than other people. Again, his time of type 1 has been very short comparative to other people as well. So it's not that he's not getting insulin. He is. His betas that are there are still making it. And so to answer the guy's question about how is he getting nutrients, his body is shuttling it in because his insulin receptors are working better.
Right.
His cells are responding better to glucose and metabolizing the glucose better with this GLP-1 assisting with all of that, right?
Right now, we're going to hear from a member of the Medtronic Champion community. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Medtronic Diabetes. And this is Mark.
I used injections for about 6 months, and then my endocrinologist in the Navy recommended a pump.
How long had you been in the Navy?
8 years up to that point.
I've interviewed a number of people who have been diagnosed during service, and most of the time they're discharged. What happened to you?
I was medically discharged. 6 months after my diagnosis.
Was it your goal to stay in the Navy for your whole life, your career?
It was. Yeah. In fact, I think a few months before my diagnosis, my wife and I had that discussion about, staying in for the long term. And, we'd made the decision despite all the hardships and time away from home. That was what we loved the most.
Was the Navy a lifetime goal of yours?
Lifetime goal. I mean, as my earliest childhood memories were flying, being a fighter pilot.
How did your diagnosis impact your lifelong dream?
It was devastating. Everything I had done in life, everything I'd worked up to that point was just taken away in an instant. I was not prepared for that at all.
What does your support system look like?
Friends, your family, caregivers, for me, the Medtronic Champions community, all those resources that are out there help guide the way, but then help keep abreast on, the new things that are coming down the pipe and to give you hope for eventually that we can find a cure.
You've probably heard me talk about US Med and how simple it is to reorder with US Med using their email system. But did you know that if you don't see the email and you're set up for this, you have to set it up. They don't just randomly call you, but I'm set up to be called if I don't respond to the email because I don't trust myself 100%. So one time I didn't respond to the email and the phone rings at the house. It's like, ring, you know how it works. And I picked it up. I was like, hello. And it was just the recording. It was like, US Med. Doesn't actually sound like that, but you know what I'm saying. It said, hey, I don't remember exactly what it says, but it's basically like, hey, your order's ready. You want us to send it? Push this button if you want us to send it. Or if you'd like to wait, I think it lets you put it off like a couple of weeks or push this button for that. That's pretty much it. I pushed the button to send it. And a few days later, box right at my door. That's it. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. Get your free benefits check now and get started with US Med. Dexcom, Omnipod, Tandem, Freestyle. They've got all your favorites. Even that new eyelet pump. Check them out now at usmed.com/juicebox or by calling 888-721-1514. There are links in the show notes of your podcast player and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to US Med and to all of the sponsors. Right. So my kind of layman's expectation is he's LADA. So LADA typically develops in individuals over 30, often between the ages of 30 and 50. Initial symptoms of LADA may resemble those of type 2 diabetes and include, everything, etc. But diagnosis, LADA can be challenging to diagnose. And listen, we've had people on the podcast talking about this forever. There's always people diagnosed type 2 when they're LADA. LADA meaning a very slow onset of type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. Ways to diagnosis: autoantibodies, presence of autoantibodies such as the GAD, glutamic acid. Jesus, can you say that?
Glutamic acid. Mm-hmm.
What's the decarboxylaxis thing? Jesus.
That's pretty good.
Okay,
Don't worry about it.
Okay. Antibodies. These are typically found in type 1s and indicate an autoimmune response. That's really what I think most people stick to. If you have autoantibodies, this is autoimmune. You're type 1. Like it gets into the
And then there are several more. I think there are 4 or 5 that are typically, this is a insulin antibody or autoantibody. There's a zinc transport. There are a couple of them that have specifics to type 1, not only the GAD.
Yeah.
So again, regardless, he clearly was diagnosed with type 1. At least one of these was positive. Right.
And your C-peptide level is an indicator of your insulin production. Is that right?
Right. Okay. Correct. So when insulin's made in the beta cells, there's a piece of protein that's attached to kind of move it out, and it's shaped kind of like a C shape is my understanding. So when it gets cleaved off and it enters circulation, that C shape remains there as an indicator of your own pancreatic insulin production, which is why when you start injecting insulin, you can still get a C-peptide level tested, because the insulin that you take via injection or pump doesn't ever put that C-peptide into your body.
Okay. And that can lower and decline over time. And that's our expectation when somebody comes with LADA, because that's exactly what I'm looking at here is over time, individuals with LADA will typically require insulin therapy as their beta cells are gradually, now this says destroyed, and their ability to produce insulin decreases. I believe in the destroyed word there, because there are definitely people they could drink GLP in their ears and they're still going to need all their insulin, right?
Correct.
Like, so for the guy in the episode that we're talking about, I guess I should have it here, 1230, he was diagnosed at 50. He was using all the insulin by 6 years in. Like he was he was using a lot of insulin, which indicated to him and to his physician, I have type 1 diabetes. Like I just do. They end up putting him on Mounjaro for weight, and he suddenly doesn't need insulin. But he's also, to Jenny's point earlier, having excursions at meals that are higher than a person without diabetes would have.
Right. And higher than somebody who was taking insulin to cover or clear some of that carbohydrate or food, right? That his betas are clearly not doing everything, but enough to clear it so that he's not sitting high for 8 hours, right? I'm assuming that his excursions along with his endocrine, they look okay.
Oh, if I remember, possibly it's only over an hour and a half. He pops 180 and comes right back, doesn't get low, and that's that.
Right.
So what he's saying is that for however long this is going to work for me, this is magical, Right. And everyone with type 1 who's listening to this, I would assume would trade one shot a week for that situation over what they're in right now.
Agreed.
The confusion becomes, and you can tell by this gentleman's question, is that what is it? It's the it's older type 1s really who think of it this way, right? Like, because what is it? Do you think it's that argument between type 1 and you're old enough to know this? You're not old, Jenny, but you're old enough to know this. Like,
okay,
old head type 1s, they don't want to be thought of as type 2s. right?
I guess in general, yeah.
Yeah, because back in the day, if you have type 2 diabetes, you don't control yourself, you're overweight, and that's your fault, right? That was the narrative. And type 1 defense of that was, oh, I can't help this. This is autoimmune. This just happened to me. And don't lump me in with people who aren't taking good care of themselves.
Right.
When that gets into the zeitgeist and that's how people think, my concern has been, and I'm using this episode to clear it up, I hope, is that now that we're in the future and we're learning new things, we don't want to jump on this poor guy and say, because I saw him take it after the episode, you're not a type 1, prove to me that you had autoantibodies, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, just listen to the guy's story. And like, I don't understand how nobody listens to episode 1230 and thinks, wow, there's a lot to learn about this GLP.
Well, and I think to go right along with it, while it wasn't a complete loss of insulin use, I know that it was either an episode or you've talked to somebody who has a teenager whose insulin needs have come down like 90% of what this person was using now being on a GLP-1. So again, not completely off of insulin, but you can see even in this person with, I don't know if she has longer diabetes than this gentleman or whatever, but diagnosed as a child, she probably had more beta cell initial destruction. Mm-hmm. And so has enough left to assist along with what the GLP-1 is contributing, but still needs some insulin.
And if she gets years like that, then good for her.
Yeah,
not just good for her, like her happiness, but her health and her longevity. It's going to help a lot of different things. So let's go into this gentleman's question a little deeper. Mm-hmm. The guy we're talking about needs insulin. He's taking a basal insulin and a mealtime insulin. He's got type 1 diabetes. Obviously, it's going to be a very slow onset. Like probably what he was taking 6 years in wouldn't have managed him well 10 years from now, even, as possibly as his beta cells continue to degrade.
Especially considering he was already having a weight management issue. And that was the reason you said the Mounjaro was started
given to him to begin with.
Right.
So then my question is, what changed? What did the GLP do? Like, I know it increased his insulin sensitivity, but how? Like, what does that mean? Do we even know that part? Or do we just know it happens?
The insulin sensitivity part?
Yeah, like how does the GLP like magically, because it feels magic. Like you need insulin and now you don't, or you need, even when you need less. Like forget this guy for a second.
Right.
My daughter takes a GLP medication. She's using significantly less insulin than she was without it. Okay.
Right.
Why? What happened?
Well, the GLP-1s work several ways. One is for those who do still have some beta cells, or essentially, type 2s who have beta cells, but it's really the use of insulin and whatnot. That's the problem. These GLP-1s do help with release of insulin. So for him, if his insulin resistance was cleared up because his weight came down and he had enough beta cell response then that his body wasn't having to overcome the resistance, then that could be a piece of it in terms of the GLP-1s helping to trigger the insulin release, actually, and maybe more in the correct way. And usability improves, obviously. GLP-1s obviously also block glucagon release from the liver. And so, our response, it's a big reason that we actually have the idea of pre-bolusing and understanding insulin use around meal times, because we do have this release of, like stored glucose, so to speak, and output of the liver. And if we block that, we are going to have lower post-meal blood sugars, which is, again, probably a piece of why maybe his blood sugar goes up, but he responds very well. And now that he's had enough insulin release and his body is sensitized to the insulin, we have to remember that these meds also slow gastric emptying or delay digestion. So the slower the things kind of sneak into with somebody who may have better insulin sensitivity now, it allows the insulin that their betas are producing to actually gain traction, right? To work. And then, of course, whether this is helping him or not, and I can't remember whether he spoke much about it, but obviously the satiety factor with all of the GLP-1s. Most people, that's a big thing they talk about is, gosh, I feel like my head is clear from not considering food all day long anymore. Like I can eat when I want to eat or I choose to eat, but I'm no longer so hungry, so to speak.
Yeah. The episode that went up today, I told you about before we started recording, so it's not on here. It's called, I'm getting the name for it, but this one is with a mom of a young type 1 daughter, and it's called Can GLP Meds Impact Mental Health?
Oh.
Episode 1254, because this little girl is bipolar, and a mixture of lithium and GLP medications took away so many of her issues. It's almost insane. But during a part of the conversation, the mom said that you could not keep packaged food around the house because she would just attack it and just eat it. And she's like, what the GLP med has done just specifically to that kid's desire for sugar is amazing. But I want to say this sincerely. It's going to sound like I'm joking. If I had a private plane, when we got done recording it, I'd get on it. I'd fly to where you are. I'd drive to your house. I'd give you a big hug. I'd tell you are a national treasure, have lunch with you, let you give me some of that weird food you eat. And then I would drive home. And let me tell you why. Let me tell everyone why. While Jenny was just saying what she said, and she is looking at me in the camera, she is not reading. Right? You know, okay.
I have nothing
Dummy
up
over
or
here.
open because I know that podcasts get recorded well when nothing else is open on the computer screen. I have learned. So, Scott, thank you.
Jenny's like, it doesn't open anything because I don't want anything to crash. Well, while Jenny was doing that, Dummy over here went to ChatGPT, and I said this: how do GLP meds remove the need for man-made insulin? Be technical, but at a 5th grade level. That was so that I could understand it. And it said, and I am not kidding, everything you just said.
Yay!
No more or no less. You just pulled that right out of your ass, okay? And it was exactly, Jenny is as smart as ChatGPT when it comes to diabetes. That's all I wanted to say. Boosting insulin production, lowering other hormones like glucagon, slowing down digestion, helping you feel full. And the wrap up was GLP-1 meds help your body make more of its own insulin, lower extra sugar, slow down sugar spikes, and reduce how much you can eat. Your blood sugar stays more stable because your own insulin and these other effects are working better. You might not need as much man-made insulin to keep your blood sugar in check. God damn, you're a fucking brilliant person. I love you.
I just know the medication because thank you very much for.
No, seriously. Jenny, I could have lined up 1,000 people and asked that question. I would have got, I don't know.
Well, thanks.
Seriously.
It's such the new, honestly.
This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the only CGM you can take off to get into the shower, the Eversense CGM. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. Well, sure, you could take the other ones off, but then you'd waste a sensor and have to start over again. But not with Eversense. Eversense is a 6-month wear implantable CGM. So if you want to take a shower without anything hanging on you, pop off the transmitter, jump in the shower. When you get back out, put it back on, and you're right back to where you started. Come to think of it, you could do that whenever you wanted to. Maybe it was your prom night or your wedding day. Maybe you just don't want the thing on for a little while, but you don't want to go all through the hassle of taking it off and having to restart it and, starting back over with like wonky numbers and having to, all that goes with it when you take off a CGM and put it back on. Oh, but you don't have to do that with the Eversense CGM. Because Eversense is the only long-term CGM with 6 months of real-time glucose readings. This gives you more confidence, more convenience, and flexibility. The Eversense CGM is there for you when you want discretion, a break, or maybe just a little adult time. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. Pop that transmitter off, pop it back on, you're right back where you started without any wasted devices or time.
I've also, GLP-1s have been on the market for a long time, despite them really gaining ground because of the new formulations that really do have a lot more power than the older versions had. But the older versions still worked. They were what we had initially, that we, the Victosas and the Bidurions and those types of things, they did a good job, just not what our current day does.
I was having this thought this morning because it became so popular for weight loss. We ended up, and listen, there was a lot of bitching in the media and everywhere else about it. But in the end, it ended up being a good thing because instead of Target using it for one thing and finding a lot of very similar people, there are people with all different kinds of health implications across the world who needed to lose weight. So we basically spread it out over everybody. And that's why you're getting back these like, hey, I'm getting pregnant on this. Or more I'm hearing about people saying their Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is like, I know I never say that correctly, but like they're having lessening effects. Now I got a girl here that says that, a significant amount of her bipolar issues are cleared up. I mean, come on, right? And then and the guy from the episode we're talking about, he's going to listen. If you want my opinion about what happened to the gentleman in episode 1230, which you should really listen to, is that he is going to get a much longer honeymoon than he was going to and need less insulin during it than he was going to.
Which fantastic, right? On so many fronts, glucose management ties into so much in terms of long-term health. It does. Cardiovascular health, brain health. I mean, all the things that are now being studied and understood about true glucose management, whether you have diabetes or not, it's tied into a lot of body function. So, if we can sensitize our bodies in multiple ways, this doesn't necessarily mean you throw out all of the good lifestyle habits that you've been trying to put into action, keeping them. In fact, exercise by far is the tip of the pyramid of anything good that you can do for your body for like an ongoing health into your later years, even as little as walking every single day, right? Yeah. But if we keep those things in the picture along with something that could help when those lifestyle things aren't doing enough for us, then great.
Yeah. I mean, listen, you say lower your inflammation. Prior to GLP, if you tell somebody, you would tell them to eat low inflammatory foods and blah, but you can't eat enough of that goddamn food to help you if you have a real problem. I mean, come on, use fermented.
Like sauerkraut?
Okay, great. Like,
I'll have my mom send you
sauerkraut on my sub. You think if I ate sauerkraut, I'd have lost 50 pounds? No. Okay. I don't have diabetes. My doctor told me all the time, like I actually was told by my endocrinologist, I don't foresee you ever getting type 2 diabetes. Like at your age where your fasting glucose is and everything I see from you, you just don't present as somebody who's going to end up with type 2. And I'm like, oh, great. I was still significantly overweight, unhealthy, et cetera, and so on. But I wasn't doing any of the things that classically people would say, oh, it's because he's doing this. Like, I really don't live a much different life right now than I did before. Right. While we're looking for like spreading out over people who needed to lose weight and learning things, I was getting iron infusions yearly, maybe twice a year some years, or I would fall apart and die. My ferritin level was going down into the single digits, right? That doesn't happen anymore. My body is absorbing iron now and I'm fine. I haven't needed an infusion in a year and a half.
And I wonder there, just in that small little narrow, I wonder if it has to do something with the way that these meds slow digestion. I wonder if it's your body now has enough time to completely absorb what it needs to. And so you don't have to medically manage your iron stores.
Yeah. And keep in mind that prior to that, my ferritin drops. And the doctor, so first of all, they think you have cancer right away. Because if you're of a young enough age and it looks like you're losing, iron, so I got to go through all that. I scope one way, I get scoped the other way. Well, oh, you don't have cancer. Good. Congratulations. Thanks. I'm still having all these problems, right? Maybe you have celiac. Don't eat gluten for a month. A month later, nothing changes. I'm like, look, that wasn't it. And you know what they said after that? Take an iron supplement. With vitamin C, it helps it uptake it faster. So I did that. You know what that did? Not a lot.
Nothing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so I was going to be one of those people that they were like, don't understand. Bye-bye. Like that was it. Like we did all the things that we understand. We go off and think. I took the GLP because I went to, when my kids, my second kid went off to college, I went to my kid's endocrinologist and I said, hey, I did it. I raised those kids. They're good people. They're not going to murder anybody.
Now I have time for me.
I need to stay alive. Right. Like, and she looks at me she knows me. She'd been helping me with things, right? And she didn't know what was happening still. And I said, I need to lose weight. And she looked at me and said, why? And we were standing face to face.
Really?
And I said, and she goes, I said, you don't see? And she goes, no. She goes, Scott, she's like, you could lose weight, but you don't look like that's your problem. And I said, well, that's very nice. And I stood up. I don't know if I've told this in the podcast. I stood up, I took off my sweatshirt, and I said, I'm going to get on a scale in a minute. You guess my weight.
Mm-hmm.
And she guessed my weight at about 175 pounds, which, by the way, is
Which
8
I know
pounds.
is well under.
Yes, is 8 pounds less than I weigh right now. And I've already lost 48 pounds. Like, so when I told her my weight, she goes, oh, God, we'll get you a GLP medication. And the stuff that came after it, she didn't say, I'll get you the GLP medication. And by the way, you won't need iron infusions anymore because of this. She didn't know that was going to happen.
No.
Yeah, right?
I think you bring up a good point there. I think that, again, despite GLP-1s having been around for a while, this new generation of them being so much more impactful, there are so many things being discovered and found that are, let's call them positives for other health related things. Now, I do think that longer term, we need a lot of evaluation and study and everything because, you're putting something in your body that technically, while it is a hormone that your body would normally make, for whatever reason, environmental, food system, whatever's happening in our today's life body, there's something that's not working the right way. Otherwise, people wouldn't be responding. I think people like you, as an example, wouldn't really be responding if your body was actually doing what it should be doing. That's
my only point, is that for me and for many other people, your body's not doing something. And this medication is covering for it somehow.
It's covering.
What do we care? Why do you just listen? I know this isn't I'd spread it on everybody. I'd sprinkle it over top of us and be like, let's see what else it fixes. We're going to figure that out. It's the baseline stuff. I lost weight so my knees don't hurt anymore. And I'm not going to have a hip surgery or something. That's nice and all. And don't get me wrong. It's amazing. But listen, This is new. Recent studies have highlighted the potential of GLP-1 agonists such as Ozempic in reducing the risk of dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease and people with type 2 diabetes. A large study involving 88,000 participants showed that those treated with GLP-1 agonists had a significantly lower risk of developing dementia compared to those using other diabetes medications like sulfonylureas and DPP-4 inhibitors. The reduction in risk was 30% compared to sulfonylureas at 23%. Compared to DPP-4 inhibitors. Come on. Yay. You know what I mean? You mean I don't have to be overweight, and when I'm 85, I'm not going to be banging my head on a wall? You know what I mean? This is wonderful. Right. Jenny, for 20 years, I heard people say inflammation's the problem, but they didn't know what to do with it after that. It feels like we know what to do now a little better.
A little better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and there are only, I think the biggest thing that I'd like to see with these medications is the right kind of education in use of them. Mm-hmm. In terms of prescribing, as a prescriber, you're a caregiver, and you should really be checking in with your patients. You should really be checking in and saying, how are things going? You start them on this, a week in, there should be a follow-up, even a quick message, right? Say, how are things going? Let's see. How are you feeling, et cetera? Because some people may respond better to one than another.
Yeah.
And if there's not enough information given upfront about how you might feel, is this normal? When should I call if it's not feeling back to normal or whatever? So I think on the case of clinicians, they really need to do a lot of self-educating about these to know what's appropriate and how to help people use them to their advantage.
Yeah, they also have to understand what they're actually doing for people, because one of the bigger problems with the GLPs right now, as it's being reported, is that the dropout rate is around 2 years. So, my opinion of that is that this medication may be doing a lot more for you than you understand. And just because you didn't continue to lose weight or didn't get to your goal weight, it might not be
Might not be the only thing that it was helping.
Exactly. Right. And doctors need to understand, like, listen, if you are one of the people who takes it and you're nauseous and vomiting constantly, it's not for you, obviously. Like, I'm not talking about just force yourself through it, but
right.
I made it through some side effects. Like there was a fair amount of time in there where I was like, I'm never going to have a solid bowel movement ever again in my entire life. And like, but I was losing weight to the point where I was like, you know what I actually thought, and this is nothing technical, obviously. This was my thought. I'll let you go.
Yeah.
It took me this many years to get this fat. I wonder what horrible things were happening inside of me then that I never batted an eye against. I didn't go out and, eat greasy food because I used to eat greasy food. I don't anymore. I didn't go out, eat greasy food, come home, have distress in the bathroom and then go, well, I'm never going to eat greasy food again. I'm like, right. I struggled through that to get to my next French fry. I better I'll try this. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I stuck with it. Now I don't have that problem anymore. But I mean, if you're really impacted by it in a way that you just can't function, I understand it's not for you. That's fine. But for everyone else, we got to keep paying attention to this, I think.
Yeah.
So to answer the gentleman's initial question, I don't understand why this guy doesn't need insulin. He does need insulin, and his body is making it right now.
Yes.
That's it.
That's the bottom line without all the biochemistry and physiology and all the stuff. Yeah. Yes. That's the bottom line.
Annie, we made a good podcast episode here. I'm going to let you go. Thank you.
Of course.
I want to thank the Eversense CGM for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast and invite you to go to eversensecgm.com/juicebox to learn more about this terrific device. You can head over now and just absorb everything that the website has to offer, and that way you'll know if Eversense feels right for you. eversensecgm.com/juicebox. Arden has been getting her diabetes supplies from US Med for 3 years. You can as well. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. My thanks to US Med for sponsoring this episode and for being longtime sponsors of the Juicebox Podcast. There are links in the show notes and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to US Med and all of the sponsors. Mark is an incredible example of what so many experience living with diabetes. You show up for yourself and others every day, never letting diabetes define you. And that is what the Medtronic Champion community is all about. Each of us is strong, and together we're even stronger. To hear more stories from the Medtronic Champion community or to share your own story, visit medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox. Once there was a time when I just told people, if you want a low and stable A1C, just listen to the Juicebox Podcast. But as the years went on and the podcast episodes grew, it became more and more difficult for people to listen to every one. So I made the Diabetes Pro Tip series. This series is with me and Jenny Smith. Jenny is a certified diabetes care and education specialist. She's also a registered and licensed dietitian and a type 1 herself for over 30 years. And I, of course, am the father of a child who was diagnosed at age 2 in 2006. Head now to juiceboxpodcast.com. Go up in the menu at the top and click on Diabetes Pro Tip. Or if you're in the private Facebook group, there's a list of these episodes right in the featured tab. Find out how I help keep my daughter's A1C between 5.2 and 6.2 for the last 10 years without diet restrictions. Juiceboxpodcast.com. Start listening today. It's absolutely free. Okay, well, here we are at the end of the episode. You're still with me? Thank you. I really do appreciate that. What else could you do for me? Why don't you tell a friend about the show or leave a 5-star review? Maybe you could make sure you're following or subscribed in your podcast app. Go to YouTube and follow me, or Instagram, TikTok. Oh gosh, here's one. Make sure you're following the podcast in the private Facebook group as well as the public Facebook page. You don't want to miss, please. Do you not know about the private group? You have to join the private group. As of this recording, it has 51,000 members in it. They're active, talking about diabetes. Whatever you need to know, there's a conversation happening in there right now. And I'm there all the time. Tag me. I'll say hi. Hey, what's up, everybody? If you've noticed that the podcast sounds better and you're thinking how does that happen? What you're hearing is Rob at Wrong Way Recording doing his magic to these files. So if you want him to do his magic to you, wrongwayrecording.com. You got a podcast? You want somebody to edit it? You want Rob.